Good afternoon to you. 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the show today, my conversation with Tucker Carlson, a brand new venture, Tucker Carlson Network. We will talk to him about that coming up. Part 1 of that interview to air at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Part 2, 5 o'clock. Stay with us for the full thing. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. After the conclusion of this program last night, the breaking news arriving that a left-wing court in Colorado is now interfering in the 2024 election and has decided to remove the Republican candidate from voters' ballots, depriving voters of the ability to render the judgment that only they can make. The Colorado Supreme Court doing the bidding of the American left, removing Trump from the ballot. I want to dive into all of the legal implications here immediately with my first guest. That's Hans Von Spakovsky. He's the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative and a senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Hans, great to have you with us, sir. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm sure when you heard that, Vince, you were thinking, gee, am I suddenly in Venezuela or someplace like that?
Well, it is so cartoonishly authoritarian. My view is that if you're not awake at this point, there's no chance of waking you from your slumber.
No, that's true. And look, it was a split decision, as you know, 4-3 with 3 dissenters. So in essence, you had 4 state court judges telling the more than 4.5 million voters of Colorado that we're taking away your right to vote and your right to choose who you think should be a candidate for the presidency.
And all 7 of these judges were appointed by Democrat governors. All 7 of them. So so even they are split on whether or not they want to be authoritarian right now. So they've removed Trump, and the basis for this, as I understand it, is they've concluded without any court, without charges or without convictions, that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Therefore, because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, he is not allowed to appear on a ballot for president of the United States. Do I have that right?
You do. And, you know, what's so absurd about that is that, where do they get off thinking that they have the ability to do that? Because engaging in insurrection or rebellion, that is a criminal violation of federal law. No such charges have been filed against Donald Trump anywhere. In fact, the only time this has happened was, as you'll recall, in the second impeachment resolution of the House of Representatives. They did include incitement to insurrection when they approved it in January 2021. And, of course, a trial was held in the Senate, and the U.S. Senate acquitted Trump. And yet these 4 judges think that they have a right to substitute their judgment for that of the U.S. Senate, which represents all 50 states in the country. That's an example of their judicial arrogance.
It is. It really is amazing. I did see of these judges, not only were they all appointed by Democrat governors, one of the commonalities between the judges who said to take Trump off the ballot is they all apparently went to elite and Ivy League institutions. The 3 judges who were in the dissent, I think they all went to the University of Denver. The one thing that the most authoritarian judges have in common is they went to elite universities, Hans. What do you think of that?
Well, that doesn't surprise me. But look, the other thing people need to understand is that these judges defied the U.S. Supreme Court in making this decision. And the reason for that is, look, they didn't even need to get to the issue of did President Trump commit insurrection or not, because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which disqualifies you from holding office if you engage in insurrection or rebellion, it only applies to people who previously were either a member of the U.S. Congress, a state official, or an officer of the United States. And the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, has held in more than one case that term, an officer of the United States, it doesn't refer to people who are elected to office. It only refers to people who have been appointed to serve in the federal government, such as, for example, a federal judge who's been appointed and confirmed by the Senate, or a cabinet secretary who's been appointed and confirmed by the Senate. So that section, it doesn't even apply to Donald Trump.
Because I would imagine that the belief is that the voters have the ultimate authority over who gets a job and who doesn't.
No, that's exactly right. The other, and look, these four judges just basically thumbed their nose at the U.S. Supreme Court's interpretation of that particular language. The other thing that they did is, look, there's case law out there saying that Section 3 is not self-executing. What that means is no court can simply enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It can only be enforced if Congress passes a statute providing for enforcement of Section 3, and Congress has never done that. In fact, one of the dissenters in this opinion points that out, and again, the majority they just glazed over that and said, no, of course we can enforce it, even though there's case law saying there's no enforcement mechanism for this.
So there's also never been an amendment to the Constitution that I'm aware of that has changed the qualifications for President of the United States, right? The Constitution lays out only 3 specific qualifications. You must be 35, you must be a natural-born citizen, and you must have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. That's it, right? Unless I'm missing something.
No, that is it exactly. And in fact, during the Trump administration, you may recall, California passed a statute saying you couldn't be on the ballot as a presidential candidate in California unless you disclose all of your tax returns. And the federal courts threw out that law saying, states, you cannot impose additional requirements over those 3.
And yet they still try. I mean, California today is trying this. And my understanding is California, in their first justification for it, who is this? Corey, one of the top prosecutors in the state. They released a letter, and it was the lieutenant governor. Excuse me, the lieutenant governor. They released a letter today, and they accidentally wrote that the president is supposed to be 40 years of age. They literally don't know what they're talking about. They had to retract the letter and then release it again and say that they have to be 35. I mean, Hans, they don't even know what they're talking about, and they're trying to bring us into a constitutional crisis.
No, that's exactly right. And look, for those folks out there who don't like Donald Trump, you need to keep in mind that these courts are basically taking away your right to choose. And this is wrong the very same way, they should be concerned about, well, the shoe could be on the other foot sometime. And for those who say, oh, that'll never happen, the shoe's already been on the other foot before. Remember, during the Obama administration, when he first became president, there were a bunch of lawsuits filed around the country saying he's not qualified to be president because he's not a natural-born citizen. And those cases were all tossed out, as they should have been. And these cases need to be tossed out. One thing that's clear, Vince, is the only place you can appeal from a state Supreme Court is to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I have no doubt that's going to happen very, very quickly.
Okay, so let's talk about that next step. I was asked earlier today, somebody asked, is it possible the Supreme Court doesn't take this up? My impression is there's no chance. This is, if there's anything that falls squarely into a case the court has to take, it is something as pivotal as a United States, as one state, deciding that a presidential candidate will not appear on their ballot.
Well, there's no law saying they have to take the case, but I just don't see how they could possibly turn this down because of what you just said. Because not only does this affect voters, the 4.5 million voters in Colorado, but this could affect 170 million registered voters across the U.S., particularly if other states like California start following the lead of this bad decision by the Colorado State Supreme Court.
It's remarkable. So how quickly does a court take this up? I've heard the phrase rocket docket. What does that mean?
What that would mean in this case, and I think the court would realize that if they took it, they would have to make a decision absolutely as soon as possible. So if they took the case, I think they would set up a very short schedule. They would tell folks to file briefs quickly. They would schedule oral arguments, and they would issue a decision as fast as possible. They have to, because, as you know, the first primaries are only 2 months away, and election officials are already printing up the ballot. So there can't be any margin of delay in making this decision, particularly because, look, this isn't the only challenge like this. There are lawsuits proceeding along these same grounds in other states, including Michigan and Oregon, and we need a decision from the Supreme Court to short circuit all of these state court cases.
Yeah. And notice what's not happening today. Notice that Donald Trump's top opponent, Joe Biden, is not condemning those. He's not. So
right.
This is supposed to be the unity guy, right, by his own declaration. Supposed to be the guy bringing us together, healing us as a country. Instead, what he's doing is he's perfectly happy to indulge this authoritarian chaos, and he's not stepping up and saying what he should say, which is, this is out of control. He needs to be on the ballot. It's up to the voters. It's not up to an individual state court. But he won't say that because he's for this kind of tyranny, Hans. It's unfortunate to say.
Well, I think you're right. Also, given the fact that this is the first administration in history to file criminal charges against what may be their chief opponent in an upcoming presidential race.
Yeah, and we're seeing exactly what that looks like right now. And Jack Smith. Well, lastly on this, just because you brought it up, but it's an important point, I think. Jack Smith, who is the Biden administration official who is hassling Donald Trump with each passing day, he is trying to rush his case ahead of the election. In your experience, Hans, is that standard practice at the Justice Department that you have to get a conviction of a political candidate prior to the election? Or can events dictate that maybe it should wait?
Well, in this case, he's asking the Supreme Court to skip the entire appeals process, which is extremely rare, and he hasn't given any good reason for that to happen, particularly given that he waited years to file these charges, and now suddenly he wants it decided so that he can get a trial in the middle of the primary and campaign season. There's no reason for that from a legal standpoint other than a political reason.
All right. Hans Von Spakovsky, thank you as always for your expertise on this subject, elections in particular. Always good to talk to you, sir. Have a great Christmas.
Thanks for having me.
All right. It is 3:19 now. Your calls and a lot more ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show. Coming up on the program at both 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock, parts 1 and 2 of my conversation with Tucker Carlson. Chatted with him a short while ago. The presidential field, the Republicans did come up. And, of course, this election interference came up. Here's one of the people running in the primary, Vivek Ramaswamy, responding last night to this decision in Colorado to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. Take a listen.
They have just tried to bar President Trump from the Colorado ballot using an unconstitutional maneuver that is a bastardization of the 14th Amendment to our U.S. Constitution. This was a provision, Section 3, that was designed to bar Confederate members. People switched to the Confederacy from actually being able to serve. That's very different than what's at issue here, to say the least. This is a hollowed out husk of what the country was built on. The basic principle that we, the people, select our leadership, not the unelected elite class in the back of palace halls. That's old world Europe, not the United States. That's why I'm making a pledge today that I will withdraw. I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot unless and until Trump's name is restored. And I demand that Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and Nikki Haley do the same thing, or else these Republicans are simply complicit in this unconstitutional attack on the way we conduct our constitutional republic.
So will there be people removing their names from the ballot as well until this is fixed? Well, Ron DeSantis was on Newsmax. Here's what he said.
2024 presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy saying he will remove himself from the Colorado ballot unless Trump's eligibility is restored. Would you do the same?
No, I think that's just playing into the left. I think the case will get overturned by the Supreme Court, but I've qualified for all the ballots. I'm competing in all the states, and I'm going to accumulate the delegates necessary. That's the whole name of the game.
Ron DeSantis not down for the fight. Colorado doing something deeply illegitimate, so treat Colorado as illegitimate, I think is the answer. Let me get Charlie and Lorton in here. Line 1. Charlie, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Charlie, what's on your mind, sir?
I'm firmly convinced the Supreme Court is going to bat this one down. It's just stupidity. In the meantime, just for the entertainment value, I think maybe Texas should remove Biden for treasonous corruption.
Yeah, so people have... Charlie, I'm going to need you to make an accusation. This will help Texas's case. Do you believe that Biden is guilty of treasonous corruption?
I absolutely do.
Thank you. I'm going to send this to Texas. An accusation is all you need, it turns out, in Colorado. So now Texas has one. Charlie just made it from Lorton. And so they'll be able to remove Biden from the ballot based on the Colorado standard, Charlie. That's thank you for your service today.
Hey, I just want to compare electoral votes between the two states. I think that would be awesome.
That'd be a big deal, wouldn't it? All right, Charlie, thanks. In fact, on this point, here's the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, saying this very thing.
Seeing what happened in Colorado tonight, Laura, makes me think, except we believe in democracy in Texas, maybe we should take Joe Biden off the ballot in Texas for allowing 8 million people to cross the border since he's been president, disrupting our state far more than anything anyone else has done in recent history.
Yeah, that sounds kind of insurrectionary, to aid and abet an invasion of the United States of America. Pull him off of Texas's ballot. Right? If it's good for the Trump, it's good for the Biden. More on this ahead. This is, the media's coverage of all of this. The media's coverage of all of this has been characteristically dishonest. Everybody keeps saying, it was just 6 Colorado residents, Republicans, in fact, who wanted to have Trump removed from the ballot. Oh, is that what it was? You credulous fools. Coming up, the big money left-wing machine that's currently operating, designed to crush your choices at the ballot box. Good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, our 2-part interview with Tucker Carlson, formerly known as the King of Cable. He's now broken free from cable television. You can find him on the internet, and you can find him here today on WMAL. More on that ahead. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah, Biden is a tyrant. Biden is a tyrant. They're not going to address this Colorado decision in any meaningful way. They're not going to try and defend the country. In fact, here's Biden's answer, asked today about this decision out of Colorado to remove his top political opponent from the ballot. And here's his cowardly, joyful answer.
President, your reaction to the Colorado ruling on Trump at the ballot?
I'm not going to comment on a court case. That's up to the court. That's all I have to say.
Wow, a slow answer from the elderly president of the United States, processing that question at 56K. So you've got Biden saying, I'm going to leave it up to the courts, he eventually declares in a piece of audio that takes far too long. He was also asked, is he an insurrectionist?
Is Trump an insurrectionist, sir?
Well, I think it's certainly self-evident.
It's self-evident, he says.
You saw it all. Now, whether the 14th Amendment applies, I'll let the court make that decision. But he certainly supported an insurrection. And no question about it.
No question?
None. Zero.
None.
And
said the tyrant.
He seems to be doubling down on about everything. Anyway.
I'm going to leave it up to the courts, but I'm also going to prejudge. He's an insurrectionist. It's self-evident. Right. That makes sense. That makes total sense. It doesn't make any sense. So what did Trump say about all of this? Here's what he said last night in Iowa.
Wonder crooked Joe Biden and the far-left lunatics are desperate to stop us by any means necessary.
Of course
they are
that's true.
willing to violate the U.S. Constitution at
100%.
levels never seen before in order to win this election. Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. It's a threat. They're weaponizing law enforcement for high-level election interference because we're beating them so badly in the polls.
Yeah, it's Trump. I mean, he is laying out the truth. All of that was truth. But Democrats are hanging on to this idea that they don't really need to, prove anything. They don't even need to charge him or convict him of anything. They can just deprive the voters of choices. Here's Jamie Raskin, Democrat, congressman, tyrant.
This is just a question of law. It's like if a 14-year-old tried to run for president, would that person be kept off of the ballot because the Constitution says you have to be 35 years old to run for president? And this disqualification clause says you cannot be on the ballot for president or you cannot serve as president.
Did you hear the Hans Von Spakovsky interview, Jamie Raskin? We just had it a moment ago. Somebody sent Jamie Raskin the Hans Von Spakovsky interview we just did. It'll be up later in podcast form. And this is irrelevant to the role of president of the United States or any other elected office.
If you have participated in insurrection or rebellion against the United States.
Like the Democrats did. The whole reason the 14th Amendment was written was to address what the Democrats did during the Civil War.
And so I would think that regardless of what your politics are, what your party is, everybody should agree that this is a question of law that's got to be settled by the courts.
Wait a second, but you just said it doesn't have to make sense. Jonathan Turley has rendered his legal judgment here, and he says it's out of control.
It puts this on a rocket docket for the Supreme Court. They've got to get involved. They've got to get involved, first of all, because there's not much time to make a final decision. And they also have got to get involved because this is dead wrong. I think they're wrong on the law. I just published a piece in Georgetown on this theory. And I think that it is fundamentally flawed, both in terms of the language of the Constitution and the history. What's striking, Kayleigh, about this opinion is that there was a series of barriers, a couple of which you just discussed, in applying this provision to bar Trump. They had to adopt the most sweeping interpretation on every single issue in order to get where they wanted to go. The only part of the opinion that is not sweeping and broad is when they get to the First Amendment and free speech. Then they adopt a narrow interpretation. They suggest that Trump doesn't have free speech protections. But in order to establish that he committed or was engaged in insurrection, they go back to speeches in 2016. And they basically daisy chain these speeches to say, look, he's been at this for a long time. I think that the factual and legal basis of this opinion is really so porous that the Supreme Court will make fast work of it.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. One hopes they address it and come down on the side of the Constitution, but no promises these days. There's another piece to this that you need to know. You were looking at media coverage today that describes what happened last night as the product of 6 Colorado residents, Republican as well as non-affiliated, who wanted to see Donald Trump removed from the ballot for being an insurrectionist. That's what they keep telling you. That's how this happened. Oh, it was just 6 Republicans and unaffiliated people. And you don't pause for a moment to ask any questions about this? It seems worthwhile. So let's ask some questions about it. How'd that happen? Now, when it comes to any political litigation anywhere, especially political litigation that has nationwide implications, that you look for the perfect plaintiffs. You look for people who come right out of central casting, the most sympathetic cases, the ones where you can only conclude that they've been wronged, right? That's how you build these things. And so it is, of course, why this was structured this way. Oh, we find people who claim to be Republicans or used to be Republicans who don't like Trump, who want him removed and say they believe he's an insurrectionist. He should be removed from the ballot because of the 14th Amendment. So that's what the left did. And when I say the left, I really mean the left. The left, at its most powerful level, has been actively seeking this outcome in not just Colorado, but states across the country. They want Trump removed. They want Trump removed from the ballot. The last thing they want voters to have is a choice. Biden can win if they can deprive voters of the choice of an alternative. So that's what they're doing. They hate democracy. They have contempt for the constitutional republic. And you're seeing it play out before you right now. The organization that is responsible for filing the lawsuit in Colorado is a group called Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Now, if you ever hear a name like that, immediately become suspicious at how euphemistic it is. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Really? How many citizens are involved in this group? How much responsibility have you actually advocated for? What do you do when it comes to ethics in Washington? Have you fixed that? Any luck there? No. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. This is a group that is in bed with, connected to, a part of the constellation of, and fundraises alongside a group you may know as Media Matters for America. You familiar with them? By now you probably are. If you've been listening to conservative talk radio for any length of time, you're familiar with them. Media Matters for America was founded by a guy called David Brock. Brock is a one-time Republican operative who in the 90s turned coat and started attacking Republicans on behalf of the Clintons and has spent his life since then sucking up to the Clintons in the most grotesque ways and doing everything he can to advance their lot in life at all costs. So he's a water carrier for Clinton world. And a couple years back, he took over an organization called CREW, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. And CREW and its founding mission was to try and hold accountable corrupt politicians in D.C. And every year up until 2013, they would put together a list of the most corrupt politicians, and sometimes they'd include Democrats. In fact, Bob Menendez was considered one of the most corrupt politicians on the whole planet, according to CREW. But that was in the early 2010s. But then David Brock took over. He took over the organization, and he really doubled down on their left-wing inclinations. In fact, he dedicated the group to destroying Trump. Back in 2016, David Brock, again, the founder of Media Matters, who would later go on to run CREW as well, and he organizes, by way of something called the Democracy Alliance, an immense amount of billionaire money from the left. He directs all of this money to these various projects. If you're seeing chaos, chances are he's involved. Back in 2016, a memo leaked, or at least his memo from 2016 leaked, and in it he discusses his plans for CREW, what to do with this organization, and how it relates to Donald Trump. And here's how he describes it in a private document. CREW will be leading, this is 2016, CREW will be leading nonpartisan ethics watchdog group in a period of crisis with a president and administration that present possible conflicts of interest and ethical problems on an unprecedented scale. CREW will demand ethical conduct from the administration in all parts of government, expose improper influence from powerful interests, and ensure accountability when the administration and others shirk ethical standards, rules, and laws, they write. Now, that all sounds good if it was a nonpartisan group who was just holding government accountable. That's not what they do, though. Here's what success will look like, they declare. Trump will be afflicted. Trump will be afflicted by a steady flow of damaging information, comma, new revelations, comma, and an inability to avoid conflicts issues. So back in 2016, this Brock-run group called CREW promised that their life's work would now become a crippling effort to take down the Trump administration. They will make sure that he is afflicted by a steady flow of damaging information, he said in this private document. They go on to say that he will be forced to defend his conduct in court. How about that? We're still living with it now. So not just in his presidency, but in his post-presidency, especially because he has an eye towards returning to the Oval Office. So they're using these very same tactics to this very day. Now, Brock himself no longer runs CREW on a day-to-day level. Instead, CREW is now led by a guy called Noah Bookbinder. Now, Noah Bookbinder is a dyed-in-the-wool, lifelong Democrat operative. He's worked at times as an attorney for the United States Department of Justice inside of our government as a left-winger, and is a chief counsel for criminal justice for the United States Senate Judiciary Committee under, yes, a Democrat, Chairman Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont. So this is a Democrat operative who's running this group. According to Influence Watch, which tracks some of this, during his tenure at CREW, the organization has been accused of growing increasingly partisan and left-wing. of largely avoiding offering scrutiny on Democrat politicians in favor of attacks on conservatives. Now, while Crew claims to be nonpartisan, it has been described as, quote, a liberal government watchdog by the New York Times, and, quote, as a partisan lapdog to left-leaning politicians by Richard Berman in an opinion piece written for the Washington Times. In his role as executive director at Crew, Bookbinder stridently criticized the administration of President Donald Trump and was a strong supporter of impeaching and removing President Trump from office during his term. In 2021, he was appointed as president and CEO of Crew, where he serves now. Since 2014, Crew has been accused of becoming increasingly ideologically left-wing due to association with Clinton family-aligned Democrat political operative David Brock. In 2017, groups under the direction of Brock set a budget of $40 million in opposition to President Trump and his administration. A major focus of the funding? Crew. Now, this is a dark money group. You don't even know who the donors are, but they're all left-wing billionaires, I can tell you that. Major focus of the funding was Crew, which serves as a center of legal opposition to the Trump administration. As executive director, Bookbinder was one of the primary implementers of this agenda. So they get tens of millions of dollars, all dedicated to the paralysis of the Trump administration and subsequently, of course, his attempts to run for president again. And they are responsible for filing this case in Colorado, for depriving voters of the chance to render a judgment about who they want to win the Republican primary and subsequently to become president of the United States. And the group has been celebrating it. When it was released in September, this lawsuit, when it came out, Crew tweeted, breaking, we just sued to enforce the 14th Amendment and keep Donald Trump off the ballot in Colorado. And last night, after the news broke that they had prevailed, Noah Bookbinder, the head of Crew, tweeted, we just won before the Colorado Supreme Court in our challenge to keep Donald Trump off the ballot as disqualified under the 14th Amendment for engaging in insurrection. A huge moment for democracy, he said without a hint of irony. More to come soon. Now, if that's not all interesting enough, what I'm about to share with you makes it fascinating, which is that this guy Bookbinder and Crew and David Brock, they have a direct line, not some long winding line. They have, this is not 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. They have a direct line to the Biden administration at the highest levels. And I'm going to show you where in just a moment. It's 3:20 now. Make it 3:50. All right, so a left-wing organization called Crew, which gets a tremendous amount of dark money from left-wing billionaires, has been behind an effort to remove Donald Trump from the ballot across various states in the country and has now had success in Colorado. The leader of that organization, a guy called Noah Bookbinder, did you know he also works for the Department of Homeland Security? The United States Department of Homeland Security under Joe Biden. Bookbinder was appointed to the so-called Homeland Security Advisory Council by Alejandro Mayorkas last year, 2022. He still is there now. Noah Bookbinder. So he is not only the head of Crew, he's also a loyal advisor to the Biden administration. You wondering at all if those things have anything to do with one another? How much of a hand Alejandro Mayorkas has in this? Oh, DHS? Oh, it's a security threat to the country. Trump's an insurrectionist. We have to remove him from the ballot. Mm-hmm. Let me take Chad in Winchester now, line 2. Chad, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Chad, you with us? Mr. Chad, calling from Winchester. This is it. All right, Mark in Woodbridge, line 3. Mark, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, quick question. Hey, thanks, Chad.
Yeah.
By the way, okay, if Trump is taken off the GOP ballot, what does that do to him, which I hope the Supreme Court doesn't let happen? What does that do to him in the presidential ballot?
They'll remove him from that, too. The same rationale. They say he's an insurrectionist. He's ineligible. He can't be president of the United States. So they'll interfere in every election they possibly can to make sure their guy wins. Coming up, Tucker Carlson will join us on the other side of the news. Don't miss it. Part 1 coming up.